Well, good afternoon and welcome to everybody. Week 3, strategic management. And we are on our way in terms of the simulation. We're jumping into the full real round, right? So let me get Lewis in here. Okay, so before we get started, does anybody have any questions, thoughts, concerns? Okay, how are you guys feeling? Are you still feeling overwhelmed? Or are you feeling a little bit better?
A little bit better. It's a bit of trial and error, though. I kind of spend the first few times just resetting back to base and messing with it, and then resetting back to base and messing with it.
I think a little bit better.
Yeah, well, at least the screens start to look familiar, even if you're not quite sure what to do with them, right? So it's not like you're totally starting from scratch, but yeah, each time you're in there, and for those of you who've done 2 full, really jumped in practice rounds, you're probably feeling a lot better. Those of you who didn't take advantage of that are probably still catching up, and unfortunately, you'll just have to do a lot more this week. So, all right, well, here's the plan for today. So I thought that, by the way, is anybody involved in Catalyzed Klamath? Okay, because that's going on this afternoon. So I wasn't sure if we might have some folks, they might be missing already. So what I thought we'd do today is talk about some strategic management concepts and then start relating it a little bit to the game. Unfortunately, because I went in and looked again this morning, and most of you haven't logged in yet for the week 11, the first round of the real game. And, no problem, because I assume most of you are going to be doing this on the weekend. So that is not surprising to me at all. Okay, but it means we have a little bit less to talk about this week, and then we'll really be able to dive in next week. But after we talk about some of these concepts, I do want to put you in some groups again to do some brainstorming on the game. And that was why it took me a little bit longer to get people checked in, because I actually have 2 lists. I tried to divide you into groups so that there would only be one person from each group, from each industry, so that you would not be in a group with somebody you're competing against. And so I created these groups based on that before we started, but I have no way of knowing who's coming and who's not coming. So we may have to refigure that depending on who's here and who's not here. So we'll cross that bridge when we get it. Okay, so we're going to talk in terms of, we're starting in, we started out last time when we talked about, what is strategy, developing some sort of strategic plan, and, what is our overall strategy? And as we learned from Michael Porter and others, there are 5 basic strategies, and each of you is going to zero in on one of those for the game. And you turned in your strategic, your company's strategy plan. And so I'll finish those up and get those posted for you right away. But so far it's looking pretty good, but I'll make some comments if I have questions or if I feel like you're missing something. I've tried to put that in there as well. So one of the things that we have to remember is we tend to focus in, particularly in the game, at first, students tend to focus on the internal. Okay, how many shoes should I make? How should I produce them? Where should I sell them? How much should I spend on marketing? What do I pay my employees? All those operational things. We have to remember that at the same time that we're doing this, others in our industry, our competitors, are doing the same thing. And so we have to be aware of what's going on in the external world around us. And that goes beyond even our competitors to understand what kind of environment that our industry and we are competing in. So if we look at today's environment, we obviously have a pandemic going on, which has changed the external environment considerably, right? We've had some supply chain disruptions. We've had, we have sick people. We have people who are remoting in to work. We have a lot of people who have lost their jobs. We have other people who are doing quite well. And if you, one of the economic theories is that we're looking at this K in terms of how the country's divided. So you have the top leg of the K. These people they've kept their jobs. They're doing really well. They're spending less money because they aren't going anywhere. So they're actually saving money and doing well. Then you have the lower leg of the K. And those are the folks who were on the front lines in terms of losing their jobs. So a lot has to do with your industry. If you were in an industry like hospitality, your industry is decimated, right? So higher education, we've continued on, but not everybody is able to do that. So we have to look at the external environment. So we take into consideration political factors. We have a different administration that started in 2021. So that's going to affect the competitive environment. And we look at, local, state, and federal governing bodies to see who's been voted in, who's been voted out, which will help us kind of figure out what kind of policies are coming our way. And if you're an industry that's highly regulated, this is super important. The economic conditions, I saw today that the Dow went up 300 points because of some encouraging economic information. Unemployment seemed to be crawling along and getting a little bit better. So we have to kind of keep an eye on that as well. If the economy starts to recover with vaccines and it recovers quickly, you're going to see a lot of pent-up demand out there for certain products. And so as a company, that's something you want to dial in on and be ready for so you don't miss the boat. Sociocultural forces, we have a lot going on right now in our country from a social, cultural, political, ethnic viewpoint. And so, those are things that affect businesses as well. Clearly, a lot of what's going on is driven by technology. And when I'm talking about technology, I'm not just talking about, the internet and computers. So technology, look at biomedical, look at all of the advances there. I mean, this is why we have new vaccines, right? We have artificial intelligence, which helps us make inroads. And what we're seeing is these leaps and bounds of change, which is pretty exciting, but it also means we have to keep up with that, right? So, and, we're worried about how our footprint on the environment. And when we talk about the environment, we're not just talking about climate, we're talking about the overall landscape. And, and I mentioned in terms of politics, I talked about legal and regulatory factors. So, I was in healthcare for a long time. It's a highly, highly regulated industry. And I was in banking before that. There were a lot of regulations there. Some that didn't do so well. And so we got new ones because we had people who were misbehaving, believe it or not. Okay. So a great way to do an analysis, and your book explains a little bit more than what I went into, is to use the idea, this concept called PESTLE. PESTLE is just an anagram for the factors that are listed here in the list. And it's just an easy way of remembering all the different things that we need to take into consideration. So you want to look at how they affect your industry, so you and your competitors, and then how they affect your company differently, maybe even than your competitors, right? So this week, you guys are in the discussion forum. You've had already some really good posts, so thank you for that. That we're looking at this concept of a blue ocean strategy. And blue ocean strategy is not just a small improvement or change in your company's product offerings, or maybe you have come up with new uses for your products, or you're tapping into another group of people, a different market than you had before. So those are iterations. A blue ocean strategy is completely different. It means you are moving into uncharted territory. You're going where nobody's gone before. And so as you read through the article and watch the video, keep that in mind. And the goal, as we talked about in the very first class, for our organization is to find and develop a sustainable competitive advantage. Blue ocean strategy is one way to do that, right? So I posted today in response to one of your posts and used the idea of disruptive technologies, right? So when Henry Ford rolled out the first automobile, that was a disruptive technology, right? That's a blue ocean strategy. When the internet is a blue ocean strategy. So these are not, as I said, smaller changes. It's because if you're really just, if you're finding new uses that you think are inventive and creative for your product, you have to stop and ask yourself, first of all, is it unique and rare? Is it easy for somebody else to imitate? Can they do it in a few months? If so, this is not a blue ocean strategy, right? So it needs to be big. It can be a small idea, but it needs to be big in terms of impact on the industry. So it also needs to be valued by your customers. And that's, sometimes we're not sure. We think we know what people want, but we don't always quite get it right. So blue ocean strategy is a very bold strategy. It can be highly successful or it can be detrimental. So it's not for the faint at heart. And we're going to talk about the forces that are applied to various industries to help us understand how competitive they are and whether or not you can be successful in them in just a minute. So they all have an impact as well. And the other part that I responded to in my post was this idea of a first mover advantage. And, if you read about a lot of, historical movements in terms of businesses and development of new businesses, oftentimes what we see is that it's the second entrant into the market that survives. And that sometimes that first mover advantage can be great, but you have to be able to really make good on it. You have to be able to implement and capture it and solidify the market and your brand and do it quickly before anybody else can come along. And that's easier said than done. And so a lot of times a second entrant can watch, kind of figure out what the vulnerabilities are with that first product and change and fix, jump in. And they also haven't had the expense of all that original research and development that's been going on. So again, if you do it and it's successful, it's amazing. So anyway, think about all of those things as you're, exploring what it means to be, to engage in a blue ocean strategy. So I put the names of the folks who are credited with this strategy, and they outlined it in their book. And it's about creating this whole new space. And what it does is makes your competition becomes irrelevant because they're not there. You're by yourself. So you can see, I like this visual representation because you're moving completely away, taking a big chance and hoping that you are successful. It's actually pretty cool, but it requires a lot of innovation, creativity, that kind of thing. Any thoughts or questions on that? Okay, so let's take a look at the business strategy game. And this is what we talked about and worked on last week. So you considered Michael Porter's 5 main strategies, right? So let's recap. You can be a low-cost, broad market, like a Walmart. You can be a low-cost, narrow market, like a store brand. You could be you could differentiate, and a lot of times that's based on quality, but in a very broad market, or like an example escapes me. Does somebody want to save me here? Okay, we'll think about it. Or you can be a differentiator in a very narrow market, right? And you might think of something like luxury goods, right? They're not trying to sell to everybody. So, and then the fifth one is that best value. So you're trying to offer the most value for the least amount of pricing that you can find. And I call that the sweet spot, which is very difficult to do. My example for that is Walmart. So I think the example I used in class for a broad differentiator would be something like an Apple, or they try to differentiate themselves in their market space in some way. So whether you agree or not, how successful they are, that is their strategy. So now, as you jump in to the first real round of the competition, you need to stick to one of those strategies. You need to choose one of those strategies, and that will drive all your decision making. So, you know, if you've chosen a quality one, then you may want to look at, you know, some of your lean practices or how well you're training your employees. You know, you want to reduce, you know, mistakes and problems, that sort of thing. But, you know, all of this affects also how many models that you're going to offer, right? So once you have that strategy in mind, then you can begin making your decisions. And just know that, remember, when you look at the bottom of the screen and it gives you a prediction, that's in a vacuum. That's if nothing else changes, if no other competitor in your industry made any decisions, that's what it would be. So typically those are, the predictions are better than in reality. Okay, so just know that it's probably going to be lower, not higher. Okay. All right. So then we also want to start trying to figure out the strategies of our competitors. And remember, for me, the place I like to go is the competitive analysis report. So if you look at your reports, you'll have your footwear industry reports, then your competitive intelligence. And competitive intelligence shows it by region. You know, there's 4 regions that you're selling in. And then and what the companies are doing, if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, that's where you see the graphs with all the bubbles. And that will give you an idea based on where they're placed in the graph, how well, you know, what their strategy is. And you want to figure out those who are the most threatening to you and those whom you can, I was trying to find a nice word, just decimate.
Consume.
Okay. Thank you. That was much better than what I was going to say. Good job. Okay, so the forces that are going to apply pressure on your industry. And so think about if you are an entrepreneur and you want to start a new business. And so you want to first of all find out if there's room in this industry for another competitor. You also want to know how successful you may or may not be. So is it inviting to new entrants, or is it very difficult to get started? So Michael Porter came up with these 5, and they've really stood the test of time. These 5 things that help you make the determination whether or not you can make it before you even jump in, right? So But if you're also in the industry, you can evaluate these, and that will help you know what to work on in terms of improving your place in these, okay? So we look at industry rival, how many competitors are there? How competitive is it? Barriers to entry are things like if you wanted to start a new airline, a barrier to entry would be a lot of capital. You got to have a lot of money, right? If there are a lot of government regulations, like you can't just hang out a shingle and say you're going to be a doctor and treat people, because you have to have a license for that. So same thing, you have to have a liquor license to open a bar, right? So there are some different kinds of barriers to entry. Substitute products are, if you remember from your marketing class, that means a similar product. So if your product doesn't offer something special, like special quality or pricing or all of the above, people might choose a substitute. So that it just means you have more competitors, because it's not just the competitors who are making the same thing you are, but it's those companies who are making things that could satisfy the customers. So for instance, transportation, right? So maybe you're thinking of you're running a like TriMet, and a substitute for that, if your company is not doing a good job, would be Uber or Lyft, right? Or some other form of transportation. So it's about transportation. So you look within that. And then the other two are the bargaining power of both the buyer and the supplier. And this has a lot to do with supply and demand. So if there are a lot of your product out there and there's not so much demand, then buyers have a lot of power because they get to choose, right? And you're all going for fewer buyers. On the other side, if you have few suppliers, and maybe there's a resource that is a little rare, and there aren't very many companies that can supply that resource, then those suppliers have a lot of bargaining power, which means they can charge more money. They can demand better terms, that sort of thing. So I think I have a graph here or picture, yeah. So this shows you a little bit more, easier to understand than a bunch of text. So in the middle is that industry competition and how much rivalry there is, because everything, that's the bottom line, right? That's the big thing that you're worried about. All of these things feed into that. And so, is it easy for other people to join this industry? So think about, a food truck. How difficult is it to start up a food truck? So, and same thing with substitutes. You could start a restaurant, but somebody could set up a food truck down around the corner from you. And so buyers and suppliers, all the things we've talked about. And now if we think back to what we opened up with, which was our pestle analysis, things in the larger environment, the economy, politically, all of those things affect these forces. So for instance, we talked about politics. Depending on which politicians, which party is in power at a local, state, and national level, you're going to see possibly changes of barriers to entry, right? So maybe with the current administration, there may be fewer barriers to entry for clean energy, and they may place greater barriers on fossil fuel energy. I don't know, just speculating here. So that was just an example. So remember that all of those bigger elements have a lot to do with it. Also, in a pandemic, the supply chains, as I mentioned earlier, kind of dried up in some areas, and it made it very, very difficult. Another thing, so my family has a home at the Oregon coast, and we had to do some upkeep because it was getting old, and we had to put new siding on, and we had chosen our siding, and it was a type of hardy siding in color. that was being shipped out of Japan, and they had the big tsunami, and we couldn't get anything. We couldn't get anything. So you never know what might be disruptive. So it's really important to know your industry inside and out. And I think a lot of you who are working right now have an opportunity to see some of this at play, particularly during this last year. Does anybody have examples? You guys really are going to make me talk the whole time, aren't you? Okay.
Why not?
Well,
Sorry, I don't have very many good examples because I'm just working IT at my church, and most of our stuff is outsourced anyway to this project, that project. So I don't have a lot of good places to pull. We haven't been impacted in the same way, I feel like.
Yeah, certainly not probably for supply chain. But you know, what would you say that starting a new congregation or church is easy or difficult?
Well, it's I could see it being easier if you're doing it literally right now, but not if you're doing a physical church. I could see doing a fully online church being a new kind of direction, which might actually be an interesting opportunity to exploit right now.
Yeah.
I could see trying to do another physical church now being very detrimental and hard.
Yeah. I think anything right now where you're building with brick and mortar could be difficult because, you know, one of the reasons why, so when my husband and I were in business, we owned a building, and it was an investment. So not only were we using it, and then we were renting out space to help pay the mortgage, but then the idea was over time it would grow in equity and we could sell it, and that would be a really good investment. But if we were trying to sell it in today's world, oh dear, right? Because a lot of people are not going back to the office.
Now is the time, if you have property, to be investing into it, hoping that you can sell it later on.
Well, actually, that's happening in the home market, the real estate market, the residential real estate market.
Mm-hmm.
So many of us are in the Portland area, and it's hot. It is so hot right now. And I know that my kids are looking for a home, and they went and looked at a home, and they are now, realtors are now taking offers. They give you like 36 or 48 hours, and they'll take all the offers that come. One of the houses they looked at, there were 4 offers within the first hour that it hit the market. And at the end of the 48 hours, there were 14 offers, and it went for almost $100,000 over ask.
Yeah.
I mean, that's bizarre. And so one of the comments on the financial sites is that investors are buying up property right now with the
So where
idea
was
that
that
they'll
in? Was that
tweak
in
it,
Portland?
make it a little bit nicer, and then sell it later. Because interest rates are still low, right?
Was that in
Yeah.
Portland?
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see how that all works, right? So
Can you
here's
hear
just Owen, we're going to say something else. I feel like I interrupted you.
Can you hear me?
Or
Am I-
it's not Owen. That's your last
It's-
name, right?
Yeah, that's my last name.
Yeah. Sorry.
So was that
That's
in
what.
Portland area?
Yeah.
Because I know in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro, it's actually a lot more excessive going on right now than what Portland's having.
Oh, really?
They're having at least 20 to 30 offers in the first few hours.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
It's crazy.
it's kind of across the country, but yeah. It's also it's also difficult to find rentals if you are looking to rent.
There's also the opposite effect that's going on. California is excessively losing people. People are moving out of the states so fast that there's one of the statistics showing that U-Haul trailers and rental trailers, you can't find them in California because everybody's leaving.
No, I think, Brett, I think that's really true. And in fact, I'm actually down here at the coast right now. Our neighbors are moving temporarily to Las Vegas, And they got a call from U-Haul that said they had to cancel their truck because people are not moving into Oregon, at least not into this area. And they don't have anything that they can send. And it's also a one-way trip, right? But yeah. So it's pretty crazy. And to your point, the market I was talking about is the suburban market. People are moving out of the very internal urban areas to external, like suburbs and a little bit rural. So I actually live
Agreed.
on 5 acres outside of Portland, and people are looking out there. They're done with the big cities. And I don't know,
Yep.
are you seeing that in Dallas Fort Worth area?
It's kind of a mix.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess it also probably depends on the city. The downtown Portland area. For any of you who live here, have you been downtown recently?
Haven't been in downtown, although I know quite a few people who have. And I've been kind of outside of Portland, and I hear it's not fantastic.
Yeah, there's just a lot of businesses are just boarded up. Yeah. And so, and in Seattle, I know my niece who lives in Seattle, she actually had to vacate her apartment because there were so many demonstrations going on and so much property damage that her landlord shut down his building. Yeah, Joanne? If you're talking, you're muted. There you go.
Still can't hear you.
Yeah.
That's weird. I had the same problem.
So if you're
Put it in
if your
chat.
audio, yeah, chat features.
Did you
all
see
of-
Gannon's post? Because that's an important fact that he posted out.
Yes. For those of you who can't see it, if you're particularly on a phone, yeah, the lumber industry is heavily influenced construction industry. For example, a 2x4 stud that sold for less than $3 is now about $10. So that adds about 20K to home construction. And I'm sure that's probably an average, right, Gannon? So depending on the size of the home and also like where it is, right?
Yeah,
Location wise.
this was like on the smaller sized homes. I know like pole barns got really expensive. I think we had our pole barn built for it was like 30,000, and the last time we heard a quote, it was somewhere in the 60 range.
Yeah. So my daughter and son-in-law were wanting to add on to their home. Their kids are growing, imagine that. And so they called a few companies, and several companies aren't even doing estimates because they are already a year out with their projects. And the cost just keeps going up. They can't bid because they're so far out. And it's kind of the same thing, right? It's crazy. So again, those are really good examples of this external world that, we have to remember that even though our operational part, which we talk about a lot at Oregon Tech, you guys take a lot of classes on how to run a good company, and it's very operationally focused and management focused and all of that. But we have to remember that we're also affected by the stuff around us. So, okay. So Joanne's saying car rental industry, Hertz filed bankruptcy. Yes, they did. Yes. And then they fought to cancel their new car purchases. They flooded the used car market, which affected used car dealerships. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I know they did file, which is kind of sad, but that was a highly competitive industry, a little saturated already before the pandemic hit. So it kind of makes sense. I think, do you guys think that the car rental industry was affected by the, Uber and Lyft?
For sure.
I would imagine because
Definitely.
especially in places like LA where you would normally have rented a car with Uber, now you don't unless you're leaving LA, you don't really need to rent a car.
Yeah, I think in urban areas in particular, right, or towns, if you're going to drive across country or something, that's a little bit different, but then you might not drive. Although I heard that car rentals, when the pandemic started and people were trying to get out of town, people in urban areas who didn't necessarily own cars, they couldn't keep a car on their lot for a long time because people were just trying to get out, or they wanted to go camping, or they wanted to just, get away from the city, or so. It's just, it'll be interesting to see how much of the changes that occurred during this past year will stick going forward. I think we're going to see, I don't think we'll go back to the way things were. I don't think we'll stay where we are right now. I think it'll be a nice mix. And at the very beginning, when Andrew was talking about, an online church, there's so much now that we are braver about doing virtually that we never thought about. So, yeah, it's exciting and kind of scary all at the same time. And I may have said this before, but I really feel like you guys are going to be finishing your education at a time of great opportunity. And, finally the economy is going to take off and there are going to be jobs, and companies are looking for people who have an education where they have learned to be innovative, to think critically, to think out of the box, to be creative in their thought process. And that's you guys. So win-win. I'm very excited about that. So if you're graduating, good luck. Good luck. I know Joanne's graduating. I forget who else is. Okay, so here's some more, this just kind of dives down a little bit deeper. So remember, we in the diagram, we put, sorry, I was reading the chat. We were talking about car sales in the chat. Yeah, how the prices have gone up terribly. Yeah, not good. So notice here, again, we put industry competition in the center. And that's because it's the big kahuna, right? And these other things affect that as well. Barriers to entry, very, very important. Here's some ideas, some examples of what you need to overcome a barrier to entry. So for instance, think about this. Let's go back to the game. And maybe you're selling a lot of shoes in Latin America. But you really want to break into the Asian market, okay, Pacific Rim. So are there barriers to entry? And what things, so maybe there's somebody who has a strong brand or a strong foothold, that can be a barrier, right? So what do you need to do to overcome that? Well, you need to get up to scale quickly, right? And all of those things that you see there. If you have a big brand, so you've been building your brand, you have a better shot at it because you can go against another big brand. But if you're just a little guy who doesn't spend much on advertising, you're probably going to get swallowed up. So think about all of these things if you decide to move into a new market, say, as you move through the simulation. And then these are some of the things that I talked about, in terms of barriers. Trade wars certainly have been, front page news for the last few years. And so, access to raw materials, that can be a scarcity. That can be another supply thing as well, right? So I think in terms of competitors, you do want to see if the market's saturated. And when you do that, you want to make sure that it's, you're thinking about substitutes as well in the real world. In the game, you're going to want to look to see if you look at your competitive intelligence and you've got a lot, if you're moving into a new market, say a new geographic area, where are you sitting in there? Do you need to change your strategy for that market? And by the way, you can have a different strategy for different markets. The thing with that, it gets a little tricky if you need different input stuff. So if you're going low price or quality, you may want to spend your money on different things for both of those markets. You have to kind of figure that out. So, but you can do it. I have had students who did that and actually made it work. So I guess that is something. And then, you know, again, suppliers and substitute products. The thing about substitute products, another thing to think about is switching costs. So it used to be that people were very, very loyal to their bank because people went in person to do their banking and they developed relationships, and it was just a hassle to switch. Well, now, you know, banks are virtual and we're doing everything virtually. And so the switching costs are a lot less. So, and it's easy for me to go in and change my bill paying from one bank to another one without too much worry. So things like that are important. You know, it's like cell phone. Well, this is one of the things Apple counts on, right? Their family of products. Once you get into
Yeah, the ecosystem.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Do you think Microsoft does the same thing?
Oh yeah. It may not be as successful, but they definitely try to do it.
I feel like Microsoft is an octopus. And for those of you who don't know me well, I am not a fan of Microsoft. So I complain about it a lot just because. So, you know, suppliers, these are some of the things that affect how powerful they are. Right. And this is why, you know, at the end of the term, we're going to start talking about larger overall strategies, things like mergers and acquisitions and integration. Do you want to vertically integrate or horizontally integrate? So if, you know, some companies do this more of a backward integration where they try to control their suppliers. So I know that several years ago, Starbucks started reaching out to some of their coffee bean growers and solidifying relationships with them and helping them become more successful and offer and guaranteeing certain prices because they wanted to lock them in. And so they didn't own them, but they made it very attractive to stay with Starbucks. And they would do things like build a school in the local community or things like that. So the other thing they could do is start buying some of those farms, and that would help control those supplies. So you have to kind of think about, again, where everybody is in the industry around you. And this is important in the game because the power of consumers really can constrain how much you can charge in your pricing, right? So, you know, again, this is where branding really helps. If people are in love with your brand and you have a big brand and a successful brand, then they're less likely to think about switching. They're more likely to stay with you, even if you have a little a problem along the way, like maybe a glitch in one of your products, or if you want to increase your pricing a little, they might not jump ship because your brand is important to them. So, you know, the example I like to use in a lot of classes is Coca-Cola and Pepsi. So a lot of people just love one or the other and they're not going to switch, right? So that's a powerful thing. Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So I want to try
one quick question on branding. Yeah. So like, is that kind of represented by just having more sales, like devoting more sales in a region? Does that kind of increase? How does that modeled in the game?
So branding is about your marketing.
It is marketing. Okay.
Yeah. And so if your marketing is successful, that builds your brand, which sells more shoes. So they're definitely connected, definitely intertwined.
Okay. So you're looking for the reaction between two different things.
Yes. So okay. How recognizable is your brand? Do retailers want your brand? Or are you getting shut out of the retail establishments, right? If you're getting shut out, your brand is low. If you have, you know, celebrities who are talking about your brand, then depending on the celebrity and how much power they have, that may be beneficial, right?
Okay.
Reputation, if you have a lot of defects And that's going to hurt your reputation, which hurts your brand. So, you know, the quality, the quality and style, you know, how many stars you have, that's also can be a symbol of how strong your brand is too, if that helps.
Okay.
So I have no idea because some people have joined since we've been talking. And so I'm going to actually see how many of us we have in my prearranged breakout groups. Let's see here. I probably should put my glasses on. Okay. Oh, okay. It looks like, why is this not? Okay, so it looks like it wants me to reassign these. That doesn't make sense, but I can try that. Okay, so in group one, I have Shane and Anne's not here. Okay, Cole's not here. So I guess, oh, I see. So in some of these groups, there's only one of you. Okay, so that's not working. Well, that is terrible. Okay, so I am going to recreate these. Okay. Well, all right, here's a question for you. One of the things that we talked about last time was if you're in the same industry, you don't want to talk about your strategy, right? But you guys, most of you haven't even started on week 11. So I'm thinking that we could eliminate this first question and maybe just still have you guys in groups helping each other figure out how to maneuver the game better, right? And then how to find where those market positions are. So you can't really see a lot of bubbles because you guys haven't done anything because it's week one, right? So
Right.
I think we should just go ahead and save this and these questions for next week. And then I'll have you guys doing something while I can figure out the better way to break everybody up, okay? Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay. All
Can
right.
you hear me? Can you hear me, Lori?
I
We can hear
can,
you.
yes, hi.
Okay, good. I got it. Sorry. I'm back.
Yes, no. Okay, let's see if that works. Recreate. Okay, sorry, it's taking a while. Whoops. Okay, so I created rooms of 3 or 4 of you. And yeah, because this way we know everybody who's in a group is here. So why don't you go ahead and jump in? Looks like you're already doing that. Good job. And I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, so we are back from our breakouts. And I asked you if you had any questions that your group wasn't able to answer, to go ahead and bring those up. Does anybody have either questions that weren't answered or a tip that they want to offer to other people, something they struggled with that they thought would be nice to share?
I think one of the questions that my group had were how you got the bonus points, because we had noticed on that some of the companies had received like a single bonus point at the end of each of the rounds.
So it has to do with exceeding investors' expectations. You know how each year the investor expectations move forward. So maybe there are like 4 things in it. So maybe return on earnings or stock price or, goes up a little bit, then if you meet and exceed that, then you're eligible for extra points. Same thing with best in industry as that goes up. And it's also comparative around what your competitors are doing. There's one, and I don't know if you guys remembered reading about it, but there is one bonus point called the leapfrog. And that's for somebody who was maybe a company that was maybe not doing very well. And they worked hard and tried to fix things and then were able to jump ahead. And so if you make big improvement, you qualify. And I forget exactly what it is, but it's a certain percentage improvement on some of those key factors. Then you can get bonus points for doing well, right? Okay, I'm looking here. Anybody have anything they want to add on that? Okay, so it should at the top of your corporate room, it should give you what the expectations are for both things for the year that you're in, right? Okay. So I think it was Monica, I think brought up something that I think does not affect your competitive ability against each other, but is probably a good practice. And that was the idea of maybe doing some screenshots and saving some of the information each year. So for one thing, you can always delete, right, later. But if you save your, where you are, then you can refer back to that and look to see, well, like, this year I changed XYZ and it seemed to really help. And I quit doing it and now I'm doing worse. So it can help you kind of figure out the changes you made that helped and didn't help, because you can look more at trends. But the other thing that she brought up was that you are going to do a presentation at the end and you're going to want access to some of your information. Now, I do send out a note to everybody after the last round closes to do some screenshots, and I make sure you have access so that you can report on where you are at the end of the game. But it might be kind of nice to see where you've come from as well. So just a tip there, and I think it might be helpful. You may or may not do anything with it, but if you don't do it in the round before it closes, you cannot go back and get that. So
there's no access. There's no access to like CSV files or anything. Because I was trying to look for that actually.
For the what files?
For like CSV files to like get numbers of. Because I saw that you could print your. You could save your decisions and print those.
But you have to go in and do that. You can't. So if you forget to do it, then you can't go back in year 12. You can't go back and capture what you did in year 11. You can't see where you were.
Actually, it does look like there are some export options that allow you to choose previous years at the very bottom. So if you're in the decisions and reports menu, if you scroll down, there's data export.
Okay.
And you can do some CSV files.
So I don't think you can see the reports though. Is that correct?
It looks like that is true.
Yeah. Sorry, I should have been clearer. For me, I put the reports to a lot of use because everything's right there. And so it's easier to get kind of an overview and look for trends if you've got, reports side by side, but that's just a thought. So everybody will figure out their own way. And one thing I've learned over the different times we've run this simulation is that people find their comfort place and what works for them, and you should just do that. There is no one thing to do, right? Other tips or thoughts that you're comfortable sharing? So after, as I mentioned, after next week. So we'll have a whole year of data underneath us. And so each week I'm going to try to give you Lori's tips. Okay. So these are the tips I have for you this week as you're really getting started, and you have read these. But what I did was I pulled a few things out, because when you're going through, there's so many things, so much information that you get, and a lot of it's important. So I'm just going to kind of pull out a few things that I think might be timely for where you are in the simulation. Okay. So this one, I think this first one is fairly important. So, as a general rule, obviously we have to have a disclaimer here. The 3 most important competitive factors affecting buyer brand preference, Andrew, right? Number of pairs sold and the size of your market share. Those are really important things, right? Price, which I think of all the 4 P's in marketing, price is the most difficult. SQ rating and the number of models or styles offered. Okay, so that's in your guide, your player's guide. But I thought pulling that out in the beginning will help you kind of get your head wrapped around what you're going to do, right? And then the second tip is really just a reminder. So we are not going hugely beyond year 15. We're going to do 18 years. So, but remember that the demand in the global market is much more robust in those first 5 years. And so this is when you want to make your mark. This is when you want to make progress, because in the last 3 years, the growth it's still growing, but it's growing at a much slower pace. So if you're behind, the opportunity to catch up is not so great. So you want to get as far ahead as you can in those first 5 years, knowing that as you move into the last 3 years, it's going to be harder for people to challenge your position if you're doing well. Okay. All right. All right. The SQ ratings are generally the second or third most important factor, along with breadth of product selection in shaping consumers' choices of which footwear brand to purchase. Okay, so I think what we're reading here is SQ ratings are kind of important, right? So you want to dig into your guide and figure out what contributes to SQ ratings. And we saw the breadth of product selection in both the first and the third tip. Okay. Anybody else want to offer tips? Which I think is probably maybe not wise, since you're now competing against each other, but right. Okay. Any last questions, thoughts? I think the best thing that you can do right now is take the time that we would normally keep talking and jump in. Now it's in your head, right? Jump in there, maneuver around, get your sea legs squared away. And so this week, you only have your discussion forum, which is on what I think is a really interesting topic, red ocean, blue ocean. And then your strategy game this year closes Sunday night, 11:59 p.m. And since everything since those deadlines affect all your competitors, they're not flexible. So, you got to be in there doing your thing. Okay. And then next week, same thing, but we do have an exam, and that's based on the reading. Okay. So, and I will get your, the quiz number 1 you did in the simulation website. I'll get those loaded tonight for you in the Canvas gradebook. Okay. And finish your strategy stuff. All right. Questions? Concerns? Well, you guys, actually, I am much more encouraged. I was a little discouraged last week. I felt like I was prodding you along, but I've been watching. And although you haven't been in year 11, you've been spending more time. So good for you. Good job on the second practice round. And may the best strategist win. Thank you. And I'll stay on. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, but I'll stay on if you have questions, okay?